The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on safety programs and training. My name is Cole Cummins. I'm the Loss Control Manager here at APEI. And before we get going with the webinar, just kind of want to go over some of the go-to webinar controls. Most of you probably are familiar with these, but just a little refresher is always good. You should see a little control panel there, and there should have a little orange arrow. If you click on that orange arrow, it'll open up a little question box, and please feel free during the presentation to just type in any questions you may have. We'll have a question and answer time at the end to go over all the questions there. But if something happens, during and you think of something, just type that in, and if I look over and see a couple different questions, maybe we'll address them at the time. But that's as simple as that. Just click on that orange arrow and type in your questions, and we'll get to it at the end. Well, let's go ahead and get started then. Talking today about safety programs and training for OSHA specifically, and then we'll talk about a couple of other trainings that we should be looking into. So OSHA has many safety and health standards that they have in place to keep workers safe. And along with these standards come specific training requirements that we need to pass on to our employees as well as ourselves and make sure that we're complying with OSHA. Sometimes it can be hard to figure out what training is required for our employees when there are so many standards out there. Thankfully, OSHA recently has created a 270-page booklet that they call Training Requirements and OSHA Standards. It's a pretty easy read, and it actually gets specific on the training requirements. So it goes through each standard that has training requirements and just singles out just that little training section. So it's just a nice booklet on what you need to be training your employees on. Now, 270 pages is a lot. The good thing is that there's three main sections in the booklet. There's construction, maritime, and general industry. Thankfully, most of us only fall under the general industry standard, which is only about the first 108 pages in the book. And so, a little bit less work for us to read. One of the main reasons that I wanted to do this webinar and why I made it up was recently I went out and visited a member, and when I was out there, I was asked to join in on their safety committee meeting. And during their meeting, they asked me what types of training they should be given to their employees that OSHA requires and things like that. So I started thinking about it, and I was naming off quite a few training requirements, and we pulled up this OSHA training booklet, and I realized it would be so much easier if I created just a little list for all APEI's members to say, here's the standard, here is the training requirement, and here's what your employees need to be trained on. So I'm hoping by the end of this webinar we'll go through that list, and it should be pretty easy. You can kind of see what you're doing right, what we might need to work on to get our employees up to snuff with OSHA and up to compliance. So that's kind of what the webinar is all about. Here's kind of the outline for today's training. We'll look at training that's required by law, specifically OSHA in this case. We'll look at some subjects that aren't required by law but are done as more of a best practice, and there's a couple of them, not too many, that I want to point out today. We're going to look at who must be trained. So is it all employees or is it just certain employees that do that specific task? How often they need to be trained? Just one time, annually, every time they use that equipment. So we'll look at that. And then at the end, I want to give you some training resources that I found helpful in putting this presentation together, and also some different training companies and resources and things like that that could help provide some training. Okay, so why training? In Alaska, we fall under what's called ACOSH, or Alaska OSHA, and they basically mirror the federal OSHA standards with just a couple of slight differences. And so why do we do training? Well, a big reason is because OSHA requires it. But the biggest reason that we do it is for the safety of our employees. And there are many employees across the country and here in Alaska that are injured every day, and we want to do what we can to reduce or eliminate those injuries. We talked a little bit earlier about training being a win-win for both the employee and the employer. And there's good reason for that. And let's briefly talk about how it affects the employer. Multiple studies show that employers who train their employees have greater retention. Employees want to work for a company that cares about their well-being and safety. You also see fewer injuries and time away from work from employees who are properly trained, and so they don't get hurt, so they're not off the job. It's good business practice because you see higher productivity from employees who are trained and know how to do the job correctly. Training helps reduce liability in a variety of areas. You're less likely to see lawsuits in an area like sexual harassment because folks are trained on how to act properly in the workplace. And they don't always do it, but at least they have the training on it. Or when police officers, for instance, are trained on excessive force use, you shouldn't be receiving complaints from the public of, seeing police, utilize excessive force. Or if you do see some complaints from it, hopefully there is, good reason for the force that was being used. But the whole point is that these folks were trained, and so it reduces some of the liability that are there. But my favorite, though, or one of my favorites, is that training lets employees know how the job is supposed to be done. The Anchorage School District, for example, puts all of their custodians in an extensive custodian training before they actually start cleaning any of their schools. Now, I know it's tough because Anchorage is way bigger than any of APEI's members, but what they realized from the start is that if employees know how to do their job correctly, they're more efficient, provide a better product, put more pride into their work, and things like that. Every year we hold a school district maintenance conference, and it's in October. And last year, the Anchorage School District talked about their custodial training program and just how much of a success it was. And what they offered to the group was, hey, if you have custodians that would be interested in taking this training, we're all into it. Now, there might be a cost associated to it, and I don't know what that is, but it's worth looking into. I know that some of APEI's members have utilized, maybe not that custodian training workshop that they have, but they've had some folks from the Anchorage School District come out to their school sites and provide training to their janitors and their custodians, and have just seen a huge difference in the cleanliness, the efficiency, the pride that the janitors and the custodians take in the work that they do, and just an overall better product. So training lets the employees know how to do the job correctly, and you get a better product for both. On the employer side, you get a cleaner school, and on the employee side, they feel like you care about them and they're putting a little bit more pride into the work that they're doing. When we talk about what training is required, we have to look at what it is that our employees actually do. What kind of work are we doing? OSHA has requirements that apply to all employees, and then some additional requirements for those that participate in certain specific activities. And OSHA calls these horizontal and vertical standards. So horizontal standards affect all employees across the board. So everyone has to have training on accident signs and prevention. Then you get vertical standards where it only applies to employees who participate in those activities. For instance, confined space entry or something like that, where me in the office, I might not need to have that training, but obviously the folks that are going out in these confined spaces, they do need that training. So that's the vertical and the horizontal. The other big piece is that OSHA requires that you maintain a record of the training to ensure it is performed and timely. These records should be maintained for a minimum, OSHA says, of 5 years. And you can be sure that if an OSHA officer or a compliance officer comes out to visit your workplace, that they're going to be asking for these training records. The big one is HAZCOM, hazard communication. All employees need to be trained on it. And when an OSHA inspector comes out, they're going to say, okay, show me your hazard communication program. And you say, oh, perfect, I got it right here. And they'll say, okay, show me your training records that everyone has been trained. And if you can't provide that, you're going to be in violation and have to pay a penalty. So make sure that you have the documentation of the training records, because not only is it required, they're going to ask you for it, and you could see yourself having a violation or a financial penalty if you don't. Okay, so here's the list that's required for all employees, and I got a bigger list. We're going to go through each one of these specifically that I think that each of you should be working off of, but this is just a list that OSHA put out for all employees. So accident prevention signs and tags, bloodborne pathogens, HAZCOM, first aid, PPE, lockout, tagout, and then other topics depending on hazards that the employees are exposed to. And like I said, this is just a starting list. We'll go over each of these individually, and there's a few more that we want to talk about as well. On the right here, I have two tabs, OSHA training requirements. This is that one document I was talking about, that 270 pager, and here it is here it is. And it's pretty slick. It was done in 2015, so it's a couple years old, but nothing moves real fast in OSHA. So if we go down here and you want to learn about table of contents, you want to learn about training requirements for general industry, exit routes, and emergency planning. Here it is right here. So you don't have to read the entire regulation. They'll just take you right to the training section of it here, which is really handy. An employer must designate and train employees, all this kind of stuff, fire prevention plans, all that stuff is just right here. Easy to access, easy to use, and it just takes so much less reading than going through each standard on OSHA.gov, or if you have one of those big booklets like I do. The other one is the OSHA Training 2255. This one here is a little bit more dated, 1998. It still has good information on here, but I'd recommend using the new one myself, obviously 2015. But a lot of the same stuff applies in this one as it does in that new 2015. But probably you're going to be in better shape by using the newer OSHA training requirements booklet. Determining training, a good rule of thumb on when employees need training are on new tasks, where hazards exist, and also where losses have occurred. So we'll go over in a minute the training requirements OSHA has, but here's just kind of a good rule of thumb. So a simple example of a new task where hazards exist could be your janitors. Maybe they're going to be using new chemicals that they're unfamiliar with. You went to the school district maintenance conference and you heard that Anchorage School District is using, these 4 chemicals instead of the 20 that you use. So, man, we need to switch over to just these 4. Your janitors need to be trained on those chemicals and the hazards they could face with those. Or maybe you had used to contract out your janitor work, and now you're going to be doing it in-house. Your employees need to be trained on all the chemicals they have, as well as the best practices for how to clean the facility correctly. Where losses have occurred, this is a really important one here. This could be as simple as retraining on proper lifting techniques after a lifting injury. We get a lot of strains and things like that as far as workers' comp injuries. Or maybe some forklift retraining after a near miss or close call that could have really hurt someone, or maybe you ran into something or someone. A lot of the OSHA standards require retraining as necessary. So this is definitely as necessary when you need retraining done when someone is in a forklift accident, for sure. Okay, so here's the main list here that I want to go over. I think there's 5 of these slides here. First one, accident prevention signs and tags. So it's kind of nice because it has the what the standard is, it has the who, which is all employees or certain employees, and then it has the when, so when the training must be done. So the first one, accident prevention signs and tags. This is for all employees at the time of initial assignment, or if the sign or tag system has changed. So these are things like danger signs, safety instruction signs, or other tags that are used in your workplace. Most of the stuff that we use is universal, but if we have something specific to our workplace and that our employees might not be familiar with, this is where we educate them on that. Next one's bloodborne pathogens. This is for employees who may have an occupational exposure to bloodborne pathogens. So, it could be teachers, janitors, police, things like that. And then OSHA says at the time of initial assignment and at least annually thereafter. So this is one of those annual training requirements we have. And the training is on bloodborne diseases and how they're transmitted, the employer's exposure control plan, and then the elements of the plan, what's in it, how to protect yourself, what to do if you are exposed to bloodborne pathogens, and things like that. Next one is the Hazard Communication Program, and this is, it says including the new GHS, but it's not. It's an old GHS. It was done in 2012, so I'm going to need to take that out. But this is for employees who are exposed to hazardous chemicals in the workplace. So this is essentially all employees. You'd be hard-pressed to convince me that you don't face chemicals at all. Even some office workers, they still find their way into the kitchen and things like that where there could be some chemicals there. So I would recommend all employees take hazard communication training. And it's before performing related duties, ongoing whenever conditions, chemicals, or duties change. So if you're introducing a new chemical, you wouldn't have to retrain on the whole HazCom program, but you'd have to train on that new chemical that you're using. And for most and all of this stuff, we have the online training, Safe Schools, as well as Target Solutions that would satisfy the majority of these requirements. And we'll talk about some other resources there. So if you're not training on all of these, don't get too scared, because we got some resources to help you with that. The next one is Emergency Action Plan and Fire Protection. This is for all employees. The Emergency Action Plan, includes how to report emergencies, evacuation procedures, exit routes, and things like that. So folks need to know how to get out of the building if there's a fire or earthquake, what to do in the event of an earthquake, and things like that. And OSHA says to review before initial assignment all aspects of the plan that the employee must know to protect themselves in case of an emergency, and then periodically thereafter, or if a change in the plan. So for instance, if you're in the Anchorage area or Mat-Su and you had that earthquake last fall there, you would probably revisit your emergency action plan on what to do in that situation for future emergencies like that. So this is one of the things you do at your new employee orientation. Make sure everyone's aware of your emergency action plan and fire protection plan as well. And then it has fire extinguishers on the bottom. OSHA says that if you're expected to use fire extinguishers, you need to be trained. Now, OSHA also says that an employer can say, we don't want our employees to utilize the fire extinguishers. If there's a fire, we want them to just ring the fire alarm and leave the area. So they wouldn't need fire extinguisher training. But if you have your employees and you say, okay, if there's a fire and it's a small one, you can contain it with the fire extinguisher, then they would need the fire extinguisher training. And that's something that would be in your emergency action and fire prevention or fire protection plan. So it's all up to the employer on whether they want their employees to actually utilize these fire extinguishers or not. And the training requirement on that is before performing the duty and then annually thereafter for folks that are expected to use those fire extinguishers. First aid for first aid providers. The OSHA regulation says that medical personnel must be readily available. And so that could be a clinic or a hospital, something like that. And then they say in the absence of a hospital or clinic in near proximity, you must have someone adequately trained in first aid. So I know it says on the right there, annual training, but the American Red Cross first aid certificate is good for 2 years. So even though I think annually is good, that's not an OSHA requirement. It would just be you have to have someone that's adequately trained. So I put annually, even though Red Cross is a 2-year certificate, so maybe 2 years. It's up to you there as the employer. The next one is personal protective equipment, or PPE. This is for employees that face hazards that may cause injury through absorption, inhalation, or physical contact. And this is per the employer's assessment. So you got to go through your jobs and through your tasks that you do and do a PPE hazard assessment. And we have a form for that as well. And so you would go through, we'll just say, welding is an easy example. You go through the welding process and you'd say, okay, well, it's obvious we need, gloves, and we need an apron, and we need a face mask or shield or whatever. And so that would be part of your PPE assessment. And then the training that they would need for PPE would be when the PPE is necessary, what PPE is necessary, how to properly wear it, the limitations of it, and how to care for it, and then just the overall maintenance of it. I go into a lot of schools, shops, and public works areas as well, and I just see a lot of these safety goggles and glasses just sitting on the counter, or maybe they're in a cabinet, an open cabinet, but it's not a closed cabinet, so it's getting all this dust and all this other kind of stuff inside the goggles. And the OSHA requirement is the PPE must be ready for use. So it's not ready for use when you have to dust it off and blow it off. You don't want to put those glasses on and put that dust in your eyes there. So that's a big one, is the proper care and maintenance of the equipment. Next one is laboratory chemical safety, and this one is mostly for lab teachers in the OSHA regulation. It says they need to know what kind of chemicals are in the classroom and what the hazards are for each chemical. Matter of fact, a lot of the science rooms that I go into, a lot of the science teachers, they say, well, we don't use, the nasty stuff like formaldehyde and things like that. But I always say, yeah, but there's plenty of other chemicals here in your lab that can be harmful to you as well as your students here. And not the frightening, but the shocking thing for me is when I say, well, where's your chemical inventory list? So OSHA requires every year that we do, as an employer, a chemical inventory list. So we go over all of our chemicals, and we get a safety data sheet for each of those. And this is especially true in the science lab. These folks need to know what chemicals they have on hand. A lot of places I go to, they don't know what they have because they just inherited all these chemicals, and there was no inventory that was ever done. So make sure you're doing an annual inventory on your chemicals and having the safety data sheets that the HAZCOM program requires. Make sure you have those attached as well. Next is electrical safety, and it says for mechanics, repairmen, operators, painters, welders, and any other employees that works with electrical equipment. And this could be vocational teachers, shop, things like that. So pretty much anyone that works in the electrical arena, which is quite a few, and we need to be trained on electrical safety. And it says before performing the duty, and then periodically thereafter. And that's up to the employer's discretion. If there was, it goes back to that earlier slide where it talks about was there a loss that occurred or a new hazard that has now been brought into the job or the task. We'll probably need some retraining on that. The last one on this page is lockout tagout. In lockout tagout, OSHA says that all employees need to be trained on the purpose and use of it. So more of an awareness training for all employees. And then actually the employees that do the lockout tagout work, they have a little bit of additional training. And the purpose of that is, if I go out and lock and tag out some equipment, I don't want someone from a different department or the kitchen staff or someone from admin to come over and say, man, this thing isn't working, and flip the breaker back on, and then there could be some shock or some other maybe electrocution, things like that. So we want everyone to be aware of lockout tagout and have that awareness training. Asbestos, this slide's just specifically on asbestos here. It says awareness for maintenance and custodial workers who work in a building containing asbestos. And OSHA says within 60 days of employment whether or not they're required to work with the asbestos. So that's just the awareness training. Then you have the operations and maintenance training, and this is the one I'd recommend. I think it's 16 hours. I can't remember now exactly. But this is for maintenance and custodial workers who conduct any activities that result in the disturbance of asbestos, which could be any of us really in the maintenance field that are going around and try to fix things, repair things, and accidentally, could get close to, some old asbestos tiles and things like that. Okay, the next one is asbestos work practices and awareness. This is for automotive shop instructors, teaching aides who may work on old cars that have brakes and clutches that have asbestos-containing material, and so they need to have that asbestos and work practice awareness there. And then the last one is information about the location of asbestos. And this is for folks, short-term workers such as contractors or repair workers who may come in and do some work for you. You need to let them know that there's asbestos in the building, where it's at, and things like that. So that's before they commence the work. And it's a good idea also to give that kind of awareness training as far as the location of it to all staff. You want people to know that there's asbestos in the building. It's over here. It's contained. It's okay, but just so you're aware, it is in the building. Next one is powered man lifts and platforms for building maintenance, so scissor lifts and things like that. OSHA says that all employees who use the lifts need to be trained on it, and this is before being allowed to use the lifts. And this is an important one. You don't want any Joe Blow coming off and saying, oh yeah, I know how to use that, and just jump right in. You want to confirm and make sure that this person knows how to utilize the different lifts that you have. Next one, hearing protection. This is for employees exposed to or above 85 decibels over an 8-hour time-weighted average. So you'd have to do some testing. But if you go into a noisy room and you do a lot of work there, then you could do some testing and say, okay, is it over 85 decibels, for this 8-hour time-weighted average? And if so, you're going to need to get some training. You're going to need to have a hearing conservation program, and that's something we can help with as well. There's some different audiometric testing that needs to be done. But and then once you have that program in place, employees need to be trained on the right PPE, the effects of that noise has on your hearing, different long-term and short-term effects there. So if you go into a room that's real noisy, there's plenty of sound meters. I got one on my phone. If it's over 85 decibels, then it's something that you want to look into. You want to do some testing perhaps if you're in there for a good amount of time. Now if you go in there just for a minute a day, it's not a big deal. But if you if you spend a lot of time there, you might look at doing some testing. Next one is respiratory protection. This one's pretty simple. It's for employees that are required to use respirators. So if you don't use respirators, you don't need to be trained on it. And then OSHA says before performing duties and annually thereafter. So you need to be trained on how to use the respirator, the appropriate way to wear it, no facial hair and things like that. You just need to be aware of the functions of the respirator, how it protects you, how to use it properly, and things like that. And then the last one on this page is permit required confined space. This is for mechanics, repairers, operators, painters, welders, and anyone else that's going to be working in a permit required confined space. And this was one of those vertical standards we talked about earlier, where the same with respiratory protection. Most people don't need this training, but if you're going to be working around a permit required confined space, or even a confined space, you're going to be wanting to get some additional training there. Powered industrial trucks is the next one, or forklifts, be easier that way. OSHA says all operators and maintenance personnel who work on them. And this is initially and when observed to operate unsafely or have been in an accident. So before anyone steps foot in the forklift, we got to train them. And if they say, well, I came over from this warehouse over here, I came from Home Depot, that's all I did was forklift. Okay, I trust you. But I just want to watch and make sure you're competent and things like that. And then if you can get that training, documentation from Home Depot, then we're styling. If not, we might need to go through our forklift training as well. And it should be a pretty simple one. There's some hands-on training, but it shouldn't take long if they're competent on how to work the forklift. The next one is welding, cutting, and brazing. This is for employees who do that kind of stuff. OSHA says cutters or welders and their supervisors must be trained in the safe operation of their equipment and the safe use of the process. So that's pretty important. If you're a welder, you need to be trained before initial use and before performing the duty on how the equipment works. So that's an easy one there for those guys. Storage of flammable and combustible liquids. This is for employees who handle, store, or dispense of these products. So maybe your public works department, your maintenance, streets, anyone that deals with this kind of stuff, they need to know how to store it properly, how to handle it. You don't want to be putting a bunch of other materials with like propane. You don't want to be putting that with some other stuff that's combustible and things like that. So there's just certain things that you want to be aware of when you're working with combustible and flammable materials. And then it says on here, this last one, long list of chemicals with specific regulations that require training. This is where you go back to your chemical inventory list that you do on an annual basis. And you say, okay, well, let's go through these safety data sheets for each chemical that we use. And let's look at the training requirements and see if there is specific training requirements for those chemicals. A lot of them there won't be, but for some of the nastier ones like formaldehyde and things like that, which thankfully we don't use too much of anymore, there's some additional annual refresher training on that. So make sure you're doing that chemical inventory list and then getting those safety data sheets that are associated with those chemicals. Kind of winding down here on this list, the last one I put on here is sexual harassment and discrimination. I know it's not a safety one, it's not an OSHA one, but it's another important one. This is one where it's not there's no law that says there has to be sexual harassment and discrimination training, but there's been so many court cases, in the Supreme Court as well, where they say if you as an employer want to have any defense in a harassment or sexual harassment or discrimination lawsuit or claim, you have to show us that you've given your staff training on it. If there's a harassment or discrimination complaint and then it goes up to the courts, they'll say, okay, did you train your employees on this? And you say no, then it's tough to beat that one. But if you say, yeah, we did, we gave them annual training on safe schools or target solutions, and every 2 years we had APEI come out and provide in-person training, things like that, you got a defensible case there in court. So this is one that is for all staff, and there's a special little additional training for supervisors, things like what to do when a complaint is made to you, how you need to be thoughtful around subordinates and things like that, and what you can and cannot do as a supervisor. So it says here initially when you first get hired, and then refresher training at least every 2 years. I know a lot of folks do it annually, but at least every 2 years is appropriate. This isn't going to be my longest webinar. I just wanted to give you a nice list of what was out there and what you should be training on. Some different resources that I wanted to bring to your attention. It says the Loss Control Manual, Safe Schools, and Target Solutions. These are our online training providers. They're free to all APEI members. If you're not using these, or if you're unfamiliar with them, please give me a call afterwards, and so we can get you set up with a demonstration, maybe a list of the available courses out there. Probably 90% of the subjects we covered in today's required training list, you can satisfy those requirements through these online training providers. Now, there are some that require hands-on training, like forklifts and things like that, but the majority of them are just classroom-style training, awareness and things like that. At APEI, we do monthly webinars like this one. We do on-site trainings where we can come out to your workplace, your facility, and provide safety training. We also now have a plethora of human resources trainings through our HR specialist, Carlene. She'll come out and provide harassment discrimination training, pretty much any HR thing you could think of. She does FMLA. She's working on this new, I think it's a new supervisor boot camp that she's working on. I think it's going to be fantastic. And then we have the regional seminars. We do an OSHA 10-hour, and then we also do matter of fact, Carlene's going to be given a 2-day HR seminar this fall, right before our board meeting. So stay tuned for details on that one. I think it's going to be really good. Intro to supervisor stuff, and then a bunch of other things that supervisors need to be aware of and need to be doing in the HR field. Then you got the Department of Education. OSHA consultation is another great free service. They'll come out and provide training for you on any of the OSHA topics that are out there. They'll also do site inspections, just like APEI would as well, and they're free. And then there's some other fee-based services. The two that come to my mind are Northern Industrial Training, and then there's EMI, Environmental Management, Inc. And they got plenty of courses on all these OSHA and safety-related courses. So they can come out to you. You can go to their Anchorage or maybe even Fairbanks facilities as well and get the training there. So lots of resources out there. Just need to find the one that works best for you and that can satisfy these requirements, and then obviously works for your employees as well. So I titled it Safety Programs and Training Requirements at the top. So I wanted to give you a couple of safety program resources. The first one I have on here is Washington State OSHA. These guys are one of my favorite. They really got some good stuff. So it's Washington State Department of Labor and Industries. If you go to their website, they got sample safety programs and plans. So HAZCOM, confined space, bloodborne pathogens, job hazard analysis, lockout, tagout, and they got a whole bunch of training videos and things like that. Get started with health and safety. Lots of good information here at Washington State. Now just be aware, they do have some slightly different requirements than we do in Alaska, but the majority of this stuff is applicable to both. And if you're looking at these ones and you're not sure, just give me a call and we can kind of go over a few of them and make sure that they meet the Alaska requirements. Washington is a little bit stricter than Alaska. So if you use their stuff, you're going to be in good shape, but you don't have to be that strict or that stringent. You could be a little bit less, but I always say it's better to be a little bit more stringent than not when it comes to this kind of stuff. So that's Washington OSHA. Let's look here. Federal OSHA has some good stuff as well on their website, OSHA.gov, sample programs, and a lot of the same stuff. Fall protection, general safety and health programs, lockout, tagout. Here's one that I caught my eye just this morning as I was looking through these. They have these e-tools for developing customized programs. So if you select Emergency Action Plan, brings you this e-tool, create your own emergency action plan, and it gives you all the details on what you need to have in your plan, and then you just hit begin, and then it goes through a 10-step process, and you can create your own emergency action plan right off the website here. So if you, and most of you should, and I'm sure you already do have an emergency action plan, but go through this and just take a look and compare it to your own and make sure that the one you have is effective and is good. Oregon OSHA, they have some good stuff as well. I like Washington a little bit better, but these guys have quite a bit of stuff. I like to go, so they have forms, guides, and posters. Then they have A to Z topic index. So if you're like, man, I need something on bloodborne pathogens, just go down to the B section, click on bloodborne pathogens, and then they got different brochures, checklists, fact sheets, a sample control plan, lots of different other references and things like that. Then they have some training that you probably have to be set up with Oregon on. But anyway, just some nice available resources here from Oregon OSHA. And then the last one here I have is Alaska OSHA, which they're working on it. They're doing better. They don't have as much resources as the other guys, but they still have some stuff on here that's helpful to us. So there's some different safety and health bulletins, some OSHA quick links, like a bloodborne pathogen guide, kind of more of a training deal there, not so much a sample program. Let's see here, respiratory protection guidance, HAZCOM. So lots of good guidance here as well on ACOSH's website. So something to look at as well. So kind of wrapping things up here, we talked about some training is mandated, in this case by OSHA. Some is more defensive to prevent or reduce risk of loss. So we're talking about harassment, discrimination, not so much required, but we really want to do this so we can prevent or reduce some liability costs in the future. We talked about training being beneficial to the employer and the employee. It's a no-brainer for the employer because you get better work out of your employees. Better production, better morale, better quality, all that stuff. And then with the employees, like we said, they want to come to work. They feel like you care about not only their safety, but their continuing education, their improvement in the work that they do. You want to see them go places. So employees like that. They love to feel like you got their best interest at hand. Make sure to keep good training records of the work that you've done, the training that you've done. Not only can you provide it to the OSHA inspector when they come out and ask for it, but you can send it in to me before each renewal, and we can give you some substantial discounts off of your workers' comp and general liability premiums before renewal there. So make sure to send me the training documentation that you have in the future of any trainings you do. And then the last one is use those resources that you have. Don't be afraid to reach out to myself or Carlene Mitchell here in the office for HR help or safety assistance. Reach out to OSHA Consultation or some of the other online providers that we have and go through those courses. So that's what I have for today. Mostly I just wanted to go over the list of what OSHA has as required courses. Hopefully it was beneficial to you to have that information. Just so you know, this webinar was recorded. It'll be on our website, akpei.com. You can go there and view it at any time. If anyone's interested in the slides, just write that down in the question box there, or send me an email at the email here below, and I'll forward those slides on over to you. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to type those in. Remember, there was that little orange arrow that pulls up that question box there. If you have any questions about what we've talked about, go ahead and type those in. Or if you'd prefer to call me later, that's fine too, or send me an email. That's great. And I don't see any coming in here. I want to thank everyone for attending today. Look for next month's webinar invitation to be coming your way. Generally, I send them out a week before, but it'll be on our website on the bottom under the events section for the upcoming webinars there. So keep your eyes posted on that. And like I said, appreciate everyone attending today. Enjoy the rest of your day. And it's sunny here in Juneau, almost 80 degrees. So I'm going to go out and take a walk here at lunch. But thanks for attending and enjoy the rest of your day.